Good afternoon to one and all. The guest lecture will commence shortly. We request all attendees to kindly keep the microphones on mute and the cameras turned off unless requested otherwise. A very good afternoon to our esteemed guest, our respectful faculty, Ms. Parimala Veluvalli, and students. On behalf of SCMS Pune and our esteemed director, Dr. Adya Sharma, I, Nisarg Trivedi, take immense pride and pleasure in welcoming our esteemed guest, Ms. Aparna. With an experience of over 20 years, ma'am has been an independent finance professional with experience in taxation, auditing, finance, and banking, having worked across multiple industries. In the past, she has worked with HP Gorse and Company, with a 25-plus-year-old chartered accountancy firm based in Pune, PwC, Royal Bank of Scotland, and WNS Global Services Private Limited. Ma'am, along with her immense experience as a finance and accounting professional, also has a passion for coaching and mentoring. Hence, she is here today with us to share her rich experience and knowledge. We are truly honored and grateful to have you here with us today, ma'am. The stage is all yours.
Yeah, once again, let me also thank you, ma'am, and thank you for taking out time and addressing our students on this important topic, which is a part of their syllabus. And I'll request all the students sitting here to please make notes because this is an integral part of your course on business law. And some of your sections may be having a multiple choice question based on what has been taught today in the class. Thank you once again, ma'am, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Parimala ma'am. Yeah, thank you, Nisarg, for the introduction and the warm welcome. So it's always been a pleasure to be at SCMS. One thing you missed out in my introduction was that I was a visiting faculty at SCMS for a good number of, I think, 2 to 3 years. It was an absolute pleasure, I think, being on the campus and interacting with all the students. And I would have really loved coming down to the campus today and physically being there to take the session. But yes, I guess this is how life is nowadays. Online is the real world. Got used to it now. So really happy to be here. Yeah, and also, I also need to thank Parimala ma'am for choosing this peak afternoon hour. Ma'am, I hope all the students are awake 3:30 to 4:30 in the
they are expected to be.
Yeah, they used to. Okay, lovely. Because when I heard the afternoon time and I was like income tax and afternoon time, I don't know how it's going to be. But yes, I'm going to try and keep it as crisp as possible so that you have some good takeaways from today's session. At the same time, getting at least a broad overview of what income tax is all about. Yeah, so without much ado, I'm going to start with today's session. I'm sharing my screen because I have a small PPT to share in terms of what all I have to say for today. Is my screen visible, ma'am?
Yes, very much.
Okay. Okay, so I have also kept like a 5 minutes towards the end of the session for question answers. So any questions that you may have on today's session, please feel free to come up with your questions at the end of the session. Or if there is something that you have a doubt about while I'm speaking, you all can put your questions in the chat box or raise your hand. I don't know what the normal decorum that is followed, but I'll be happy to answer any kind of questions over here. Right. So coming to the topic, we are going to get a brief preview about income tax today. So the session is all about introduction to income tax. Now, I'm a chartered accountant and I'm a certified public accountant from the US. So with both my qualifications, I have done a whole lot of taxation. Right, in my articleship, I have gone into the length and depth of income tax, filed returns, done a lot of work with the income tax department, a lot of tax planning, to be honest, a lot of tax evasion also, yeah, but I think that's a part and parcel of how things are. So I'm going to try and introduce you to at least a few basic concepts of income tax. The topic of income tax, actually, especially Indian income tax, is so vast and it is so comprehensive that when we were studying for CA, we studied income tax for like almost 1.5 years, right? But that involved like learning each and every section and so on and so forth. So I found it a little difficult to kind of crunch it up in whatever 50 minutes we have today. But I've tried my best. Do let me know if there's anything else you would want to know. I'll be really happy to touch base upon it. Right. I'll start with like a small quote that I have on tax, or the history of tax, as you can say. This was a quote by one of the very famous historians, who said that it was only for the good of his subjects that he collected taxes from them. He was referring to the king, that is a ruler at that time. Just as the sun draws moisture from the earth and give it back 1,000-fold. Right? I really like this quote because for two reasons. One, it talks about the history of taxation. And second, it basically talks about the nature of income tax. Right? So the first part talks about history of taxation. The concept of taxes goes back like centuries back, right from when we had the kingdom concept, right? We didn't have the state concept or the government concept and so on and so forth. Even kings of olden times used to collect taxes from his people or the citizens of his kingdom. And what is the nature of the tax? Just like the second part of the quote tells us, just as the sun draws moisture from earth to give it back 1,000-fold. So the whole idea of collecting taxes is to collect from people, but to give it back to them. But it is given back in a different form altogether. Right? So we all know that taxes, both direct and indirect taxes, they form a major part of the government exchequer. The major part of income that the government gets is from other direct and the indirect taxes that it collects from the citizens. What do they do with these taxes? They spend on infrastructure, they spend on hospitals, they spend on education, and a lot of other facilities that we get around us. That is all coming from the taxpayers' money. So this is the idea. It's not that it's their income and they enjoy with it. They give it back to us in terms of facilities or in terms of a whole lot of benefits that we enjoy around us. That's the real nature of taxation. So one, it's a very old concept. Second, of course, the nature, the intent is very noble behind collecting taxes. Now, coming to today's topic, which is the Income Tax Act. Okay, we're going to talk about only direct tax, and we're going to talk about only income tax, right? The tax gambit is very, very wide, right? So at the broad level, we have direct and indirect taxes. Under direct taxes also, you have wealth tax, you have inherent tax, you have income tax. So there are so many forms of direct taxes. On the other hand, you have indirect taxes. There you have your GST, you have customs, you have excise, and some other 10, 15 taxes over there. So when you talk about taxation, taxation as a topic, there are many forms of taxes that we come across. But today's focus is, of course, only the Income Tax Act. Right? Today's focus is only the Income Tax Act. It was enacted in the year 1961, just as the name suggests, it's the Income Tax Act 1961. So it was in the year 1961 that this statute was formed. The act actually came into place, and it is the statute under which everything related to taxation is listed. Now, I don't know whether you understand or you can fathom the difficulty of doing this. Whoever was writing the act had to make sure that the act and its rules and its sections was so comprehensive that they could cover maximum possible income under its gambit. Right? So they had to make the act so comprehensive that every small nitty-gritty of income could be covered, and they are able to tax and recover tax from that. Right? So for that reason, the Income Tax Act was incorporated. And what all does the act include? It talks about how income tax is levied. It talks about how income tax should be collected. It talks about administration, and finally, it talks about recovery of income tax. Right? You must have heard of these voluntary tax schemes. You must have heard of income tax raids. Now, all that comes under administration and recovery. So either people voluntarily file their return, declare their income, and pay taxes on it, or if they are not voluntarily doing that, then they have other ways of recovering tax from you. Right? So you don't want to go to that stage really. It's always better to file your returns and pay off the little bit tax that you have. So hopefully they don't have to come to recovery of income tax and so on and so forth. So this is what the act is all about. As I said, it's a statute under which everything related to taxation is listed. A little bit more about the act. Now, it's a long list of sections. The Income Tax Act, as I said, whoever drafted the act had a very daunting task, because they had to make sure that the act is so comprehensive that all aspects of taxation get covered in that one act, right? So what do we have in the Income Tax Act? If you're not familiar with the Roman numerals, that is 23. Okay, so there are 23 chapters in the Income Tax Act. There are 298 sections, and there are 14 schedules under the act. Now, the idea is not that you all have to learn all this, but the idea is to make you all familiarize with the idea that income tax is vast. It is just so vast. Ask me or ask any student who's studying for CA. We actually had to memorize the entire act, all the 298 sections. What did each section talk about, the provisions of each section, what the schedules meant, and so on and so forth. So though the intent of whoever drafted the act was very very good, that he wanted to make a very comprehensive act, when it came to us learning all those sections and all, it was quite a nightmare. But anyway, so we have these chapters based in the act. We have these 298 sections. We have 14 schedules. We have a lot of income tax rules. We have the Finance Act. We have a whole lot of circulars and government notifications issued by the Central Board of Direct Taxes. And we have the judicial pronouncements. All this taken together form the Income Tax Act. Right? Anybody knows what is Central Board of Direct Taxes? Have you all come across this term anywhere? CBDT? Any introduction at all to taxes so far in your syllabus anywhere? Anybody studied income tax? Do you all know what is CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes? Not really? Okay, so Central Board of, so basically income tax is taken care by the Central Board of Direct Taxes. Central Board of Direct Taxes, CBDT, comes under the Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance comes directly under the government or the Prime Minister. So income tax is so closely monitored. It is directly monitored by the Ministry of Finance. Naturally, why not? Because if it is the both biggest source of income for the government, they are going to monitor the taxes very closely. So this is in a nutshell what all gets covered, or where all will you look for when you're talking about the Income Tax Act as such. There has to be a mention of the Finance Act whenever we are talking about income tax. I hope you recognize this lady. She's our Honorable Finance Minister, Dr. Nirmala Sitharaman, right? And the red folder that she's holding in her hand is our Union Budget. I don't know how many of you all follow the budget. I think BBA students, I don't know how much interest you all have in following budgets, but we as students of taxation, budget is like the event of the year. So come February, come the last day of February, 28th of Feb, and all chartered accountants are probably glued onto the TV to watch the live coverage of the budget. Now, why is the budget so important? Right? Why is the budget so important? The reason why the budget is important is the finance minister on the day of the budget presents a finance bill. Now, this finance bill proposes amendments to the direct and indirect taxes, right? So what amount of taxes you're going to be paying in the coming year is all spelled out in the budget. So that's why everybody's so eagerly waiting for the budget. So you know, are there any upaniche in the rates of taxation? Are there any new provisions added? Are you getting some new exemptions and so on and so forth, right? But of course, amending the act and proposing amendments to the direct and indirect taxes is not a child's play. The amendment has to be approved by both the houses in the parliament. Once it is approved, then it becomes a part of the Finance Act from the first day of the next financial year. We are going to look at certain terms also of income tax. But remember, the Finance Act and the Union Budget are two very, very important parts of the income tax. Right? Because the act is based on Finance Act and also the finance bill or the Union Budget, which is presented by the finance minister every year. If not, watch the budget in the coming year. and at least try and go through the highlights of what the finance minister has to say. And honestly, till you don't start earning, taxes don't matter to you so much, right? Because right now you'll be like, okay, tax is just another subject. It's only when you start earning, when you get your salary slip, when you see tax deducted at source, that is when you're like, oh, what is this? Right? That is when you start taking interest. Okay, at what slab am I going to be taxed at? How much tax is going to get deducted at source when my salary is going to be paid out to me? So all that is eventually going to come to you all very soon. So this is about the Finance Act and what kind of role it plays in the whole income tax situation of our country. As I said, there are certain terms that we're going to be taking up in today's class. Of course, when you talk about an act, I mean, like income tax or any other act for that matter, there's going to be a lot of technical terms, right? And every term has a specific meaning, right? And the terms have to be so well defined that the users of the term are not able to find out loopholes in definitions and work around with it, right? So in the original act, in the original Income Tax Act, the definitions are in a lot more detail, right? But I'm not going there. The idea is just to familiarize you all with some of the basic terms that are very regularly used in the Income Tax Act. The first one is assessment year, right? Does anybody know what's an assessment year? Parimala ma'am, do they have income tax anywhere in their syllabus?
Yeah, so these students are all in the semester 3, and they'll be having direct taxation in semester 5 when they go to the 3rd year.
When they go to 3rd year. Oh, so there's still time for you all. Okay.
Yeah, and some of the students are specializing in accounting and finance. For them, direct tax is a compulsory elective. So whatever they're learning right now is actually going to be adding value because they have a core course in their 3rd year.
Okay, lovely. Okay, great. Yeah, so you're going to be doing all this. Yeah, I remember actually I've taught a batch of 3rd year students income tax actually once when I was visiting the when I was visiting faculty at college. Yes, so you're going to come across all of this. In fact, whatever I've covered today is all going to come to you in semester 4 and 5 when you're going to do direct taxes. Yeah, so anyway, starting with the first definition, let's look at what an assessment year means. Assessment year is a period of 12 months starting from the first day of April every year. Right? So when you say what is an assessment year, it's a period of 12 months and it starts from the first day of April. For example, if somebody tells you assessment year 2021-22, we are talking about a period from 1st April 2021 to March 31st, 2022. Okay, what is the significance of an assessment year? Income of the previous year is taxed in the assessment year. Income of the previous year gets taxed in the assessment year is very crucial. Huh? In the assessment year, if income tax department does your assessment and closes your file, nothing like it, right? Because if it doesn't come in the assessment year, that means there are some issues with your income tax return and you might be called upon to clarify, or you might be called upon to explain what is there in your return and so on and so forth. Now, income of the previous year is taxed in the relevant assessment year. So what is previous year? Previous year is the year that we are talking about, or the year we are in, the financial year immediately preceding the assessment year. So you earn in the previous year and the taxes of the previous year are paid in the assessment year, right? Taxes of the previous year are paid in the assessment year. So for example, if assessment year is 2021-22, then the previous year is going to be 2020-2021. Right? I hope this is clear. If there are any doubts, you can raise your hand or put a message in the chat box. So previous year is the year before the assessment year. That's why it's called a previous year. And whatever income is earned in the previous year gets taxed in the assessment year. Right? So that is about previous year. Third definition, which according to me you all should be knowing, is who is an assessee. Okay, the next slide is about who all are supposed to pay income tax. But before we go there, the technical name for who all are supposed to pay income tax is assessee. Who's an assessee? a person by whom income tax or any other sum of money is payable under the Act. So anybody liable to pay income tax becomes an assessee under the Act, right? Now, a lot of times, I get this very often, students tend to confuse payment of income tax with their citizenship. So they're like, if I'm not a citizen of India, I am not supposed to pay Indian income tax. Nothing like that, right? The government that way does not make any kind of distinction. If you earned anything at all in India, you are liable to pay taxes in India itself. We're going to see that a little later when we come to a term called residential status. So these are the three important or very basic definitions that you need to know over here. Right now, as I told you, we're going to come to the question on who should pay income tax. Now, who all are supposed to pay income tax? A very easy answer to that would be anybody who has income has to pay tax, right? Anybody who has income has to pay tax. But the Income Tax Act has actually spelled out who all should be paying income tax. So starting with an individual. So basically just every individual person is liable to pay income tax, right? In fact, the Income Tax Act says that even if you don't have taxable income, you can file your nil return, right? You can file your nil return so that the income tax department is aware that you don't have any income in particular year. An HUF, I don't know whether you are aware of these forms of organizations. HUF is nothing but a Hindu undivided family. Now this, we do still have a lot of HUFs running businesses here. So Hindu undivided family is basically a joint family which runs a business together. Right, it's a very interesting topic, like, so in an HUF, so if you have a joint family of, let's say, like 2-3 brothers and sisters together and their children and all of them are together running a business, the business gives out a certain income in the year. Now, in whose hands is the income taxable? How does the income get divided between the joint family? Yeah, because there are no specific roles, or there are generally no agreements between them on, who should be taking which share of profit and so on and so forth. So HUF is a very interesting concept. So they say HUF is also liable to pay income tax. Any company or firm, so every company or firm incorporated and has a legal existence is liable to pay income tax. AOP and BOI, what do they mean? Any association of persons or body of individuals, period. They want to include any form of association at all. So you cannot say that I'm not an HUF, or I'm not a company, or I'm not a firm, or I don't have a legal form, I cannot pay income tax. No, you can be just a simple association of people working together, you are liable to pay income tax. You can just be a body of individuals who've come together, you are liable to pay income tax, right? And lastly, any local authority or an artificial judicial person not falling within any of the preceding categories. Right now, as I told you, they have to be a little smart about this. So they've defined a person or people who are liable to pay income tax in such a way that through some or the other definition, they catch hold of you and make you liable to pay income tax. Right? So whether you are an association of person, you are just an individual, you are an HUF, you are an artificial judicial person who's not falling into any of these categories, basically you are liable to pay income tax. Furthermore, the Act says that this list is only inclusive, it is not exhaustive. So if you are if you're very creative and you come up with some other form and you say that, oh, this form has not been defined by Income Tax Act can say that these definitions were only inclusive, they are not exhaustive. So we can still include you in the ambit of income tax, right? So this was about who all are liable to be paying income taxes. So anybody and everybody has to pay income taxes. Is that okay? Now, of course, I cannot physically see your faces because sometimes students just nod like this and I get to know that they've understood. So I'm assuming you're doing all that, right? If you're not asking questions or you're not raising your hands. So with this, I'm going to move ahead. After we get to know who should pay income tax, I want to just quickly take you through the procedure on how income tax is charged. How is income tax charged? I'm just giving you a very broad outline of what the procedure is all about, right? First of all, it is an annual tax on income. So that means you have to pay income tax every year. You cannot say that, oh, let my income accumulate, let me earn some money, then I will pay taxes. No, whatever you earn in whichever year, no matter how much it is, annually you have to file your returns. Annually, you need to pay taxes on it, right? So it's an annual tax on income. This we've already seen that income of previous year is chargeable to tax in the next following assessment year at the tax rates applicable for the assessment year. Now, this is another daunting task for all practicing chartered accountants. These tax rates keep on changing. So you have to listen to the budget. You have to be aware of the existing tax rates, because all the individuals are going to pay taxes at the applicable rates for that particular assessment year, right? How is the tax rate fixed? Now, the tax rate is fixed by the Finance Act and not by the Income Tax Act. If you read the Act per se, the Act does not talk about the rates at which income tax should be charged. The rates of income tax are given by the Finance Act. Now, why is it so? Because the government wants to control how much taxes should be collected. Finance Act is by the Ministry of Finance. Ministry of Finance directly comes under the government. So Ministry of Finance decides what are going to be the tax rates, right? So it's the Finance Act which is going to fix the rates for the for any particular year. Let's say assessment year 22-23. That means these are the taxes that you are going to be paying in the coming year, right? So this is about how income tax is charged. It's a yearly tax. You have to pay it in the following year, and you have to pay it at the rates which are pronounced at the pronounced by the Finance Act. Now, who is liable to pay tax? It is charged on every person if the gross total income exceeds the minimum income chargeable to tax. Now, I'm going to introduce you to the slabs defined by the Income Tax Act. So if you are above the basic slab, you are expected to pay income tax, right? There are some exemptions. There are a lot of deductions you can claim for senior citizens. That is people above 60, people above 80. There are different kind of rules. So it's like really complex, actually, the whole Income Tax Act. But to keep it simple for now, all you have to see is that if you are beyond a certain basic slab, or you are earning, your income is beyond a certain basic slab, you are liable to pay income taxes, or you are liable to file your returns for that year and pay taxes. Okay, so these are, like, as I said, like a very broad outline of how income tax is charged. Okay, now if life was so simple, then who needed chartered accountants, right? It's not that way. It is just so complex, like filing a return. I'm going to share the website with you where you can go and file your returns. Just go and have a look at the income tax return, right? The very site of the form only is like, I want to go to a CA, because there are so many columns and there are so many details that go into it, so much of calculation that a layman, though they are calling it the Saral form and they're trying to simplify the system as much as they can, but it cannot be done, right? I mean, it's very difficult to have a very simplified form which caters to everybody's income and so on and so forth. So end of the day, it is very complex, and yeah, that is why CAs make money, right? Because it's complex. Ordinary people can't understand what's happening, or somebody who's not studied taxation cannot understand what's happening. So you have to go to a CA to consult upon how much taxes to pay and file your returns and so on and so forth. Right. So a broad overview of how income tax gets charged. Okay. Now, as I told you, we are going to deal with something called as residential status also, because this is also very important. Whether you will pay income tax or no depends on your residential status. Okay, remember again, residential status is got nothing to do with your citizenship, right? So it's not like if I am not a citizen of India, I am not paying taxes in India. It's nothing of that sort. So that's why the Income Tax Act has specially defined residential status, right? So whether you are liable for income tax in India or in fact any other country in the world, it depends upon the residential status of the person and not on the citizenship of the person. So what all kind of residential statuses have they defined? They've defined something called as a resident. They've defined somebody called as a resident, not ordinarily resident, right? And lastly, finally, a non-resident. So either you are a resident, but not ordinarily a resident, and finally you are a non-resident. Now, depending on which one are you, you will be accordingly paying taxes. I am reiterating, do not confuse residential status with citizenship. It is not like a citizen, NRI, or not a citizen, or so on and so forth. It talks about your residential status. Okay. I'm actually going to get a little technical now to explain you a little bit more on residential status, because it's very important. I remember in Symbiosis, a lot of students used to come from abroad, out of India also, to come and study here. So when you spend a specific period of time in the country, you become a resident, right? And you're liable to pay taxes in the country. I mean, of course, not applicable to you all, because you all must be on, whoever has come from outside the country must be on student visa, probably not earning, and so on and so forth. But these are certain things that you have to remember when you talk about paying income taxes. Yeah, now, as I said, I'm going to go a little technical over here. How is your residential status determined? Right? If you see the heading of the table over here, the period of stay in India in the current financial year or previous year, either ways you call it, determines your residential status. So in the given previous year, that is given 12 months, 361 or 365 days, I'm sorry. Out of 365 days, how many days do you spend in the country determines your status. So if you see the very first branch is, are you staying in the country for more than 182 days? Then you are a resident, right? You are a resident, and every possible income you earn in India, abroad, anywhere gets charged to tax in India. So if you're a resident, your income earned anywhere at all is going to get taxed in India. If you've stayed in India for less than 182 days, okay, when you talk about less than 182 days, there are further classifications under that. I'll go with the easier one right at the right of the screen. You stayed for less than 182 days, but less than 120 days. 120 days, matlab how many months it is? 30 days in a month, so we're talking about 4 months. If you've been in India for less than 4 months, then you're non-resident. Right? And the moment you become non-resident, a lot of incomes go out of your ambit. You are not liable for tax for a whole lot of incomes. Why? Because you don't spend that kind of time in the country. Right? So if your period of stay is less than 120 days, you become a non-resident. Now, if your period of stay is between 120 and 180 days, so more than 120 but less than 180, you can be resident but not ordinarily resident, or you can be a non-resident, right? Here itself, a lot of people who travel a lot, or who have families abroad, or who have businesses abroad, only determining what is their residential status itself, they need to go and consult somebody, because you can imagine from all this that if your period of stay is anywhere between 120 to 180 days, then whether you are an Indian citizen or a person of Indian origin, income less than 15 lakhs, income other than foreign source, you become a resident but not ordinarily resident. Right? So first of all, to figure out whether what is your residential status itself, you will know, you will need help, unless it's very clear that you are here for more than 182 days. Right? So this was a whole jargon about determining your residential status. So your residential status, your income, your assessment year, financial year, previous year, all these are like the bare basics of income tax. These are your starting point of income tax. So before you even go towards calculating your income, these are certain things that you need to sort out before you jump onto calculations over here. Okay. We move on to the next topic that I have for today. Yeah, I don't know whether you guessed what I'm going to talk about. Looking at so many heads over here, I'm going to talk about the different heads of income. Yeah. Now, a very, very simplified version I want to give you over here. We're going to talk about the 5 heads of income, and we're going to just quickly look into what gets covered under different heads of income. Now, why do we need so many heads of income? Because for the Income Tax Act to detail out that if you have income from property, then what all provisions apply to property. If you have income from salary, what all provisions apply to salary. So to go into the detail of each head of income, the different heads of income have been defined over here, right? So what are the different heads of income? As I said, we have 5 heads of income, though the picture shows 6. I think I picked up an incorrect picture here. I should have had somebody with 5 heads. Anyway, so there are 5 heads of income. 4 of them are very specific: income from salary, income from your business or profession, income from house property, income from capital gains, and there is the 5th heading, that is income from other sources. Again, Income Tax Act makes sure that if your income does not fall under any of the 4 heads, you will definitely fall under other sources, right? So those of you who are already thinking of how to not pay taxes, it is very, very difficult. Yeah, it is very difficult. They made sure that the act is so comprehensive that they catch you from here or there, right? So these are the basic 5 heads of income over here. We're going to go through what all gets included in these 5 heads. Okay, again, not very big definitions over here, just to give you an idea of what all comes under income from other sources. So when you talk about income from other sources, what all gets included? Savings, bank account, interest. So generally, if you're like a retired person, you have a lot of money in the savings bank account, your only source of income is the interest that you are earning from the bank. That interest gets charged. Unfair, no? Actually, I find this provision very unfair. You work throughout your life, you put some money in the bank, now you're earning interest on it. Now income tax is charging that also. Yeah, you're further paying taxes on taxes, I feel sometimes. Your fixed deposits, all the interest that you're earning on fixed deposit is taxable. Winning in lotteries, that should definitely be made taxable, right? Because there's no hard work over there. So whatever you're winning in lotteries, the government wants a share in that. So I don't know if you watch this KBC and you watch all these lottery, the rate of tax is so high. So if somebody's actually won 1 crore in Kaun Banega Crorepati or KBC or any of these kind of lottery schemes, out of that 1 crore, 30%, that is 30 lakhs, is going to go to the government. So you're going to be left with only the remaining. Even if you win a car, okay, in a lottery, now you will say I won a car. But if the value of the car that you won is, let's say, 15 lakhs or 20 lakhs, 30% of that has to get deposited by you as tax. Then only you get possession of the car. So winning in lotteries is not so easy. You have to pay your taxes on that as well, because that all gets covered under income from other sources, right? Income from house property, pretty straightforward. So if you have house properties and you put them on rent, you're earning rent on them, all that comes under tax. All that comes under income tax. So the house you live in is the only house that you're allowed to keep. If you have more than 1 houses and you've let out the other houses on rent and so on and so forth, all that rent gets covered under income from house property. Then income from capital gains, yes, one of the major areas of taxation nowadays, because this is income from sale of a capital asset, like your mutual funds, your shares, house property, all that gets taxable under capital gains. Now remember, the rent that you earn from a house property goes under the head income from house property. But when you sell a house property, it is under capital gains. The moment you sell a capital asset, you have to pay capital gains tax on it, right? So any asset, mutual funds are your asset, shares are your asset, gold is your asset. Any asset you sell, you will have to pay capital gains on it, right? So that's the 3rd head of income over here. Then is your income from business and profession. I used to not like this head at all. I used to not like this source of income at all, because it was so complicated. The amount of provisions for income from business and profession are like too many, just too many. The reason being that business and profession, when people carry out business, it is very difficult to make sure that all the income that they earn gets routed through the bank, right? So if your business is run on cash, right? If your sale is happening on cash, you take cash, you pay cash, it is very difficult for the income tax department to make out how much you're earning, right? Versus that, the moment you sell an asset, the moment you sell a house, you have to go to the registrar's office, you have to pay the stamp duty, you have to make an agreement. The income tax department comes to know. The moment you buy a house property, put it on rent, the income tax department comes to know. Savings account, fixed deposit, lotteries, income tax department comes to know about. But when you talk about business and profession, there can be many ways of evading taxes. So this section is like the fattest in your income tax act. Now, what does income from business and profession talk about? Profits which is earned by self-employed individuals, businesses, freelancers, contractors, income earned by professionals like life insurance agents, chartered accountant, doctors, lawyers, etc., who have their own practice, tuition teachers, they are all taxable under this head. The moment you have anything, a business or a profession of yours own, you come under this head of income from business and profession. Very, very complicated source of income. I think the easiest and the best source of income is income from salaries. I think it's so sorted under this head because you don't have to do anything. You're working, your employer has to calculate your tax, deduct the tax and pay you salary. You are so sorted, right? So whatever salary comes in your hand, that's already tax deducted. You don't have to really bother about how much taxes you have to pay at the end of the year and so on and so forth. So income from salary is like the pretty most straightforward heads of income. Is that okay? So these are broadly your 5 heads of income defined under the Income Tax Act. Anybody, any questions or anything to say here? You okay? Oh, super. Lovely. So these are your 5 heads of income, and just a brief outline of what all comes under each one of them. Yes, any topic of income tax is incomplete without the rates, right? Without getting an idea of what are the possible income tax rates and the slabs and all, the discussion is fairly incomplete. Now, when you talk about income tax rates, different rates apply to different people, right? Different rates apply to different people. How? It depends on whether you are a firm or a company or you are everything else, right? So there are only 2 broad categories over here. Either you are a firm or an Indian company, or you are an individual HUF, AOP, BOI, or whatever form of organization you are. If you are a company, if you are an incorporated firm or a company, you have to pay taxes at a fixed rate. There is just one rate given to you, like a 30%, a corporate taxation rate. I don't know whether you all read about it, you all are aware about it. There's just one rate, corporate taxation rate. So it's a 30%, 35% period. All companies have to pay taxes at that rate. All firms have to pay taxes at that rate. But when it comes to other forms like individual, HUF, AOP, BOI, and so on and so forth, your rate of income tax depends upon your income slab, right? Now, the whole idea of having income slabs and different rates of income was basically to remove the disparity of income. So anybody who's on the higher bracket of income or is earning a lot, you charge them a higher rate of tax, right? So they are expected to pay tax rates of 30%, 35%. Those whose incomes are a little lower in the slab, or those who don't earn too much, their tax rates are anywhere between 10 to 15%, right? So it depends upon what form of judicial person are you. Depending on that, different rates of income tax apply to you. Now, this is like a quick summary here. I know it is quite a bit. I don't. You have to remember it actually. When you will study direct taxes, you will have to learn all the slabs and the tax rate, because you have to do calculations based on all this. This is like a quick preview to all kinds of slabs that we have, the income categories that we have. Now, I'll talk about the right-hand side of the table first because it's simpler and there are less, what you call less items there, which is the existing regime slab rates. What is the existing regime slab rate? You have only 3 slabs: 2.5 lakhs to 5 lakhs, 5 to 10, and above 10. So if you're between 2.5 and 5, you pay 5% interest. If you're between 5 and 10 lakhs, you pay 20% in 20% taxes. And if your income is above 10 lakhs, you will end up paying 30% taxes. If you come to the left-hand side, you have this whole new regime. Yeah, you have this whole new regime of slab rates and tax rates and so on and so forth. Under that, if you see, there are a lot of slabs. So 2.5 to 5, 5 to 7.5, 7.5 to 10, 10 to 12.5, and so on and so forth. So the highest slab you have is 15. If your income crosses 15 lakhs, you pay 30% tax. Now, very interesting fact actually. You as a taxpayer have a choice. That do you want to pay taxes under the existing regime or do you want to pay taxes under the new regime? Right? Interesting, no? Everybody will say new regime because you'll end up paying less taxes, but there is a catch. You know, income tax department is not going to leave you like that, right? So if you say, okay, the new regime slab rates look very attractive, I'll end up paying lesser taxes under the new regime. The catch is you get far less deductions, exemptions, and allowances under the new regime. So if I say my income is 7.5 lakhs and I want to pay 10% taxes instead of 20% under the existing regime, Income Tax Act will say, okay, you pay 10%, but then you're not allowed any of the deductions, exemptions, and so on and so forth. That means just take 7.5 lakhs, multiply by 10%, pay the tax, finish. What do we do on the existing regime? When you go into the details of income tax, you'll realize that there are a lot of exemptions and deductions you can claim, which can reduce your tax liability, right? Ultimately, I think whether you file your own taxes or you go to a consultant to get your returns filed, they're going to compare both, right? They're going to look at the new regime, old regime, and see which one is working out better for you, under which regime you'll end up paying lesser taxes, and that is going to be the regime for you. Right? So we have a choice now, but be careful. Don't go by just the rates and the lesser rates over here and choose the new regime. It has a catch. So calculate your tax properly and then decide which regime you want to go with. Right? Now, all the incomes don't fall under this slab story. So it's not like every income that you earn goes under this slab of 7.5, 10, and so on and so forth. Because imagine if this year I have sold some shares. The moment I sell shares, the holdings I have, I might immediately cross 10 lakhs and I will end up paying 30% on it. Right? So it's not fair to people who are selling assets. Or if I've sold a house property this year, the moment I sell a house property, I'm sure to have an income of more than 10 lakhs and I'm going to straight away get taxed at 30%. So for that reason, capital gains are an exception to this rule. So capital gain income does not fall under the slab category. They are taxed altogether in a different way, right? Now, capital gain is a chapter in itself. It's a discussion in itself. So whether you have long-term capital gain, whether you have short-term capital gain, you have 10% rates, 20% rates, then you have normal 30% rates. So again, capital gains is a whole new gambit of section and a whole lot of provisions over there. But remember, if you sold any asset, your income is taxed as capital gains. The moment your income is taxed as capital gains, you are not eligible for the normal slabs. You pay taxes at completely different rates applicable to capital gains, right? So that was one important thing about the rates and the slabs. I'm going to actually wind up the session on just giving you a little overview on how to file tax returns. Of course, I cannot possibly take you all through the procedure because it's very, very complicated. Just for your own fun sake, you can visit the website and see how taxes are filed or how does the even form look like. I'm sure after seeing the form, many of you all will never feel like filing a return again. But it's okay. I mean, those of you who enjoy income tax can try filing their own tax returns and all. Now, one very important thing or a big change that has come in filing of tax returns is that only e-filing is allowed, right? There is no more physical submission of income tax returns. I remember my articleship days, nightmarish it used to be. So there used to be a deadline of 30th November to file the returns of corporate firms and so on and so forth. And people who are not proactive will give their books of accounts just like 15 days before the due date of filing return. So everything is such a rush. Then 30th November, you land up at the income tax department to submit their returns. And there used to be a queue. There used to be like a never-ending queue to submit your returns, right? And you just hope and pray that before the end of the day or by before 12 o'clock midnight, the return gets submitted. So there is no late submission as such. So all that is done away with. Now your returns have to be submitted only e-filing is permitted. Only e-filing of returns is permitted. This is a portal that I was talking about, incometax.gov.in. And the extension directly takes you to where you can go and see the ITR, the income tax return form. Have a look at it just for fun. You can go through all the different columns and heads and how is it calculated. Of course, it made the form very, very user friendly now, but still, I mean, there is always a little bit of that tension, you know, when you're filing an income tax return, because you don't want anything to go wrong. You don't want to miss out anything in the form, because then again file a revised return, and that is a procedure in itself, right? Finally, just your due dates of filing returns. It's not that you can file your return anytime whenever you feel like, because if they give you that kind of leeway that you file your return whenever you're free, I'm sure nobody's going to land up filing returns. So there are due dates for filing returns. Again, the due dates depend upon whether you are an individual, whether you are an HUF, whether you are a company, whether you are a listed company, and so on and so forth. Right? And you have these due dates like 30th November, 31st August, 31st December, so on and so forth, which most of the times keeps on getting extended. If you read the papers, for some or the other reason, the due date keeps on getting extended. Good for us, we get more time to file our returns and get together our income and so on and so forth. Yeah, so that's about it, what I had for today, actually. I don't know whether you all found it very rush or whatever it is, but these were a few topics which I thought were like the bare basics of income tax, which you should be aware of. So if you were awake and listening to all this, I hope you got some inputs. As Parimala ma'am said, there's going to be a test on this, huh? So I hope you were attentive. Yeah. So that's all I have for today. If you'll have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
So now the floor is open for questions, and I really encourage students to, you know, pose any of the questions. And if there's anything that you need more clarity on, this is the time to ask. You can raise your hand and we'll have you unmuted.
They can unmute themselves.
All right, so you have a provision of unmuting yourself and asking. So you can make use of this time to ask anything with relation to what has been covered today. Okay, we have Sahir who has raised his hand. Go on, Sahir.
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, ma'am. I had a doubt for students who do not have an income but are investing in shares, and if they are, earning a profit on that. So, is it necessary for them to file an, a return?
Yes, absolutely. Unless you're a minor, I mean, like if you're below 18, then there are these provisions where your income gets clubbed with your parents and so on and so forth. But if you're above 18, then yes, if you're making profits on investing in shares and all, you are liable for income tax. So, Sahir, if all this investing and selling is happening through your bank accounts, yes, you better file your taxes.
Okay, I think Pushkar has a query. Go on, Pushkar.
Yes, ma'am. So you said that we have to file for return. So suppose we trade on Zerodha, right? So they charge you securities transaction tax and So is that altogether different and you have to file for taxes anyway?
You have to file for taxes anyways. What Zerodha is charging you is also, so, basically, as I told you, when it comes to direct taxes also, there are, like 20 different taxes over here. There is cess, there is surcharge, there is transaction tax. Even if you go to a restaurant to eat, you have service tax and so on and so forth. So there are different ways, different types of taxes. So income tax is completely different. So what they collect from you is not your income tax. So that will have to be calculated and put down separately, depending on your purchase and selling price and so on.
Okay, any other questions? So I have a question that is due to COVID, what sort of relaxations have been given with regards to filing of returns?
So the date for filing the return got extended quite a bit. In fact, in COVID, I think we spent like one entire year was given for filing returns. So in that year of 2020, there were no income tax returns those were filed. But yeah, barring that, there was no additional hardship allowance that was given that for people who lost out on incomes or so on and so forth. There were no additional exemptions and all that were given. Barring the extension of due date of filing the return, nothing specifically really for COVID.
Right. Also, another question that I had was, what was the logic of introducing the new regime? What was the rationale of giving an option?
The idea was to make the tax structure as simple as possible. So what has happened is, as I told you, there are 298 sections. Now, these sections deal with all your allowances in a lot of detail. So let's say like I'm a teacher, I have an institute of my own where I teach. So while I am earning income from my teaching services, there are a lot of expenses that I incur, right? I have a laptop, I have a car, or I have a project, I pay electricity bill, I pay rent. I have like a list of 100 expenses. What happens when I file a return is, I put down my income, I put one expense. Now for every expense, I have to see, is this an allowable expense? Can I claim deduction? And so on and so forth. So I have to maintain very detailed books of accounts, maintain each and every receipt of my expense, because I can be called upon by the income tax authorities anytime to show that, okay, when you claim you're paying a 50,000 rent, where is your rent receipt? Now for a lot of businesses, it's a headache. So those who don't want to get into this whole issue of maintaining books and looking at one item of expense, they just go by the new regime, a flat 10% tax. We don't want to claim any deductions. We are done. So this is my income, 10% tax. So the idea was to simplify the whole tax procedure. I do that actually. I do that my institute, because otherwise you have to maintain like really detailed books of accounts, and you can be called upon anytime to show your books of accounts. And so rather just pay a flat rate of tax and be done with it.
So it's in line with the larger agenda of simplifying all procedures, across.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. They've done a lot of good things. I just hope it's all taken in the right intent and people make the right use of it. But otherwise, the idea is very good, trying to make it as simple as possible so that, like everybody can file their taxes and understand what's happening with their income taxes.
True.
Yeah.
So if there are any questions, we can take it up right now. All right, the presumption is that you have understood everything, that there's no room for any questions. So I'll get to test them when they have their evaluation. Yes, Nisarg, over to you.
Thank you, ma'am. On behalf of our director, Dr. Adya Sharma, respected Parimala ma'am, and our students, I'd like to take this opportunity and thank Aparna ma'am for such an insightful session. We thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule and sharing your experience, giving so many valuable insights from more than 20 years of your experience as a finance professional. You definitely are a role model to our students present here today. I'd like to extend my gratitude to all those who helped facilitate this session, especially Professor Parimala and Dr. Ashutosh Mathur, Head of Placement and Corporate Affairs, for their constant support and guidance. Lastly, I'd like to thank each and every student for their active participation and for cooperating with us. Thank you and stay safe, everyone.
Yeah, my thanks also, ma'am, for really making this subject simple, because we are teachers of law and we know how tough it is to teach legislation. So there's a whole lot of glossary we need to first explain to the students before we even come down to the content. So I made a lot of notes today and it was very lucidly explained lecture. So
that's my intention. I'm like, like in a 45-50 minutes, as simply as I can put it, that would be the achievement, because otherwise the act itself is pretty complicated. So
true.
I'm glad for that feedback.
Yeah, it was really well delivered. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you,
So,
everyone.
students.